Welcome to episode 80 of Silver Lining for Learning. I cannot believe after 79 episodes, we are still here. We still seem to have a lot of ideas we have not explored. We have a lot of shows lined up in the future, but today, this episode is host reflection. Just to remind you, we are a bunch of professors and doing really trying to do interesting things. And so we have Dede of Harvard, we got Curt Bonk of Indiana University, we got Punya Mishra of Arizona State University, and I am Yong Zhao from the University of Kansas and University of Melbourne. Today is very special. Curt has a big event who has to go to, and so we will start with Curt on the reflection, and just in case he has to leave. Curt, what do you have to reflect on? What would you like to share with us?
Well, we had episodes 78, 79, 76, 75. We could reflect on any of these. Well, what seems to be happening here is that we've done a good job at many things, not just one thing, but many things. And that includes highlighting new initiatives around the world, interesting ones. Emerging technologies, international collaboration, and international projects that no one's probably among us had heard about previously. We're hearing, of course, about educational innovations and new models, trends, people who are basically making a contribution, and important ones, and pushing ahead and pushing us all to think. So we're blessed. We've also heard from many reports, books, and we'll hear about a new UNESCO report in a couple of weeks on the future of learning. So we'll be getting that from Noah Sobey in a couple of weeks. And next week we're going to hear. It's going to be a little later next week at 7:30 Eastern time. We're going to hear from my former student Sharon Wong and her colleague Jasmine Zhu talk about a new hybrid program of teaching English for kids in the rural parts of China that had their parents move to the big cities and have been left behind and are being raised by grandparents or a single parent. That's going to be a really fascinating show next week, so stop in for that. But we're hearing all these fascinating things, and it's very cool. But what we haven't done is we haven't really come back to the student voices again, and we haven't really heard, most importantly, from the teachers who are implementing these new ideas and new models and new initiatives. And I think what we have to do somewhere along the lines is bring in public or private school teachers. We've had a few along the way, but we need to have a concerted effort, maybe at least once every couple of months, or maybe have a little suggestion box within the Silver Lining for Learning show itself, or a little place people could drop suggestions. And that's happening within the blogs. It's happening within emails. I've gotten a couple this week, in fact, of people say, wow, I watched this show. I'm really excited about it. And I didn't forward them to you all, and I should have. But there are people out there being energized from our shows. But I think that Yong, you and Punya and Chris can tap into something that I don't necessarily have as much linkage to or connections to, and that's the teachers in K-12 schools. Now, I have the new book coming out internationally with 40 odd teachers internationally, but I'm talking about in the US here in North America. I think we need to bring some people in, and we need to hear their voice. We need to hear from them on whether they've heard about the new report on blended learning or on something else, and if they have, what they've done about it or how they've gotten trained, what the professional development is like today compared to 2 years ago. How have things, funding for professional development, how has that changed, if at all? How have the mentoring programs changed, if at all? How have the university school partnerships changed, if at all? How is the outreach and extension from, there's very famous universities represented right here within our team that have done extensive outreach. But what's been happening and getting the new ideas, initiatives, programs, models implemented within said schools around the country. And I think, Yong, you did a brilliant job of bringing students in early episodes, and we were all extremely excited and flabbergasted to some degree on the extent of self-directedness of these young people. And there was a true hope that we saw, a true vision that we saw in those episodes. And we haven't come back to that. We've been highlighting all these interesting things again in these last few shows. I'm really excited when we brought in Tony Wagner in a few weeks ago, and we brought in the people who are Tanya Jolston and Nicole Weber and so forth, talking about blended learning. That was great, but we can do more. That's my thoughts for today to get us started. And I'm curious what the rest of you think.
Well, thanks, Curt. That's a nice reflection. We will definitely try to get in touching, with reality again to promote students. But really, speak of reality, I was really very impressed with the Punya, what's going on with Arizona State University. That change in teacher arrangement in the teacher workforce. It's kind of fascinating. I was wondering, Punya, what kind of things you might add or reflections you have had about that program, and of course the other blended learning, and also the big educational questions we heard about from Tony Wagner and Ted Dintersmith.
Yeah, so let me start with Ted and Tony's the What School Could Be the website. And I don't know if you have visited the site. It is really a pretty ambitious attempt to create an online community of educators. And so I didn't get a chance to talk much about it, but we had an opportunity to work with Ted, Tony, and with my office here at ASU to do this thing called Project Springboard, where we invited vertical teams of educators from around the nation. We got a few international. We had Canada and Australia represented as well. And we worked with them over a period of, I think, 8 weeks or so, where we had like 4 sessions of sort of work and discussion, and then they would work in between. And it's been very exciting. I mean, the report out of that, I can share it with you guys. The kind of work that, and it was kind of interesting is, we had this vision when we first started that by fall, vaccinations would happen and, things would be quote unquote back to at least in our everyday sense, normalcy. Then of course, vaccination rates didn't go as fast as we thought they could. And then the Delta variant, of course, came and, threw a wrench in the proceedings. And so, any plans that were being made were being sort of, revised on the fly. But it was really cool to work with these teams from across the country and, like I said, a few across the world, and using using the What School Could Be website as sort of quote unquote a LMS, a learning management platform, where we could create a little course shell within that. So that was a sort of a really nice experience that me and my team had over the past, we are actually now have a grad student who's reaching out to interview all of the team leaders. Hopefully we'll, learn something more from that, but that's been a fun experience. But coming to the next education workforce piece, I wish we could have gotten Carol Basile, the dean, on the show, because this is completely her thing. I mean, she from day one has sort of talked about that in the medical field, we have an array of experts, we have distributed expertise, people coming in as and when we need, this idea of teams. And Brent was hired exactly for that reason, who was a guest on our show, to make that a reality. And I think some things that we have done as a college really right and smart has been leverage the fact that we place a lot of our interns, and there is a educator shortage, so everybody wants them. But we say only if you are willing to do the team teaching model. So we will not send our students if you are not willing to do that. And it's, I think, a really smart use of leverage. And also one of the things that Brent talked about is cutting down the number of schools we work with and say, let's work with the fewer number of schools, but let's work much more in depth. Let this be a genuine partnership. The other component that we didn't get into as much is redesigning of the teacher prep program. And that's been a huge effort that's been going on for 3 or 4 years, partly saying exactly the same thing, that if we truly believe that this form of distributed expertise and array of people around a set of learners, we truly believe that, then we need to be doing that in our teacher prep as well. And as you can imagine, that's a huge challenge, that Nicole Thompson, and at some point, I mean, she might be a wonderful guest to have. I mean, maybe we could get Nicole and Carol in a show, a few months down the road, because that is a very ambitious attempt. But at the heart of it, it goes back to, I think, in some ways to, President Crow's vision, as well as, the idea of ASU's charter, that we are known by who we accept rather than who we turn away. I think that was a great episode, and I'm glad that we got a chance to talk to them. I have to share one final thing about President Crow. So I was talking with somebody who's a vice provost here at the university, and he's sort of special projects man. Like, President Crow has an idea, how can we redesign the student experience? And his job is to start looking at all the components in the university. And he told me about this phone call that he got from Michael Crow. And Michael Crow asked him, he said, I need you to find out all the different places that we are saying no to our students. And how can we convert those no's into a yes? And this guy told me this 2 weeks ago, and I have not been able to stop thinking about how profound that question is. Because it changes everything. Because if you think about, what do we say no to? You can't take this class because you need this prerequisite. You cannot look up the internet while you're taking an exam. We give so many no's. And if you start asking, why are we saying no to this? And how can we convert it into a yes? It dramatically changes how we think of the work that we do. And I think that's sort of a definition to me of what President Crow does, right? He asks these questions and then gives people the freedom to go and try it and say, okay, how can we, just think of that question. I started thinking of, like, what are all the things I said no to my kids? Like, why did I do that? Did I really have to? What are the things that I say no to people on my staff? Do I really have to? How can I, and it just changes the way you look at the world. And I think if universities and organizations like this, schools, start thinking in terms of that, I think you have a completely different culture, a completely different environment, a completely different way of thinking about solving some of these challenges. So anyway, so those are some random reflections.
Punya, what is this consulting rate? I'd like to bring him to a department meeting sometime. That would be really great to have. Because I've been fighting those fights,
I don't think you can afford President Crow.
Well, I tell you, I may have a guy for you. I actually have worked and I've written about this school in Melbourne, Australia. It's for about 10 years now. The guy became the school principal of Templestowe College in Melbourne. And he changed the whole argument is to say any answer to students is a default yes. And as long as it doesn't disrupt in other people, as long as it does not cost hugely, they start with yes. That's a very powerful answer. So the guy has retired from a school. He runs his own organization called Future Schools Network. In Australia, about 70 schools are in part of that.
Right. I've seen that. So why don't we have a default yes session, a show, and the default is yes.
Exactly. If you start with yes, when you're talking about different departments, different colleges, we need to bring Chris in, is that you remember academia is a manufactured scarcity, right? Academia is saying no does better to preserve what we have. That's what, if you say, like Harvard is great because it says no to a lot of people. You're very proud to say, we only admit 2% of students, how great we are, Yep. So that's a very different kind of situation.
And this is what I really love. Here are some of the, ASU has its challenges, don't get me wrong, but this continuously going back to the charter and saying that we are known for who we accept rather than who we turn away. It is repeated over and over till it becomes part of, and part of the reason why I felt comfortable moving from Michigan State here, because I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and then Michigan State, both land grant universities. And so that commitment to the communities within which we live, that our work should always be relevant, especially in the fields like ours, for sure. And even though ASU is not a land grant university in that historical sense, I think it imbibes some of those things in a very powerful kind of a way. And just to complete this narrative, Zhao, I was talking with my dean the other day about this statement from President Crow and how much it resonated with me. And then she told me about how she's been trying to get people who are emeritus faculty or people who have tons of experience in the educational space to serve as advisors for our EDD students. And the roadblock is IRB, because IRB has a policy that you need to be a benefits eligible employee of ASU to be the PI. And she cannot get a straight answer as to why that is an important policy. But there it is. And every time she reaches out to them, they send the same policy back to her. So now she's trying to get to the provost and say, who made this? Why is this there? And it's like it's just saying no for the heck of it, right? Instead of starting.
That's what we do, actually. So I want Chris jump in. The idea about saying yes, would that really ruin anything and other than students' life? So Chris, I was wondering what your reflections are, and what do you think of the proposal of saying yes?
Well, let me start with the first thing, which is the proposal of saying yes. I think that what makes sense always depends on what business you're in. And if you're in the education business, and your classrooms and campuses and courses and degrees and certifications and admissions, then those are all forms of saying no to many. If you're in the lifelong learning business, that is, most people think when I introduce that into my talks, oh yeah, I guess we're in the lifelong learning business. And I guess that's a little different than the education business. It is enormously different than the education business. People should be terrified when I tell them that that's where we are, because all these forms of saying no, all these forms of control, all these forms of artificial scarcity are flipped when you're in the lifelong learning business. So I'm all with this, and I think it would be fun to have some shows. It's been a while since Roby Brannon came on and talked about the 60-year curriculum, which has that kind of an emphasis to it. I'm afraid my reflections are more somber. I've been thinking about history, and one of the things that I have found comforting about history, that I think many people feel comforting, is this idea that people get themselves into a lot of trouble at times, a lot of trouble with wars and economic collapses and different kinds of diseases and living conditions. But when the chips are really down and people figure out the peril, they come together in order to resist the peril. And you saw this clearly in something like the Second World War, where people delayed far too long to recognize that it was happening, but when they did, they threw out all the barriers to making a response, and they all pulled together regardless of their many differences, and got through it. So what I'm somber about is that is absolutely not happening now. In fact, the opposite of that is happening now. The pandemic is a huge peril, very well documented. And yet, there are so many people with other people dying all around them who deny the existence of the pandemic, and who, if you say, no, it must be true, look at these facts, say, where do you live? I want to firebomb your house. If you look at climate change, that's absolutely happening. It's happening much faster than the worst of the pessimists felt about it. It's absolutely having a huge impact on many aspects of people's lives that's well documented. And again, far from coming together, people are at each other's throats. And even things that I had thought were stable, like laws, that had been common practice for 75 years, now, the courts are saying, well, now that we were appointed by somebody with a different political philosophy, I don't think this law is accurate. Well, what is the point of having any laws if the laws are simply going to be interpreted according to whatever ideological perspective is sitting in the seat of power at the moment? So we celebrated Silver Lining for Learning because it disrupted the gridlock of the industrial era education system and the compliance mentality of those committed to preserving it. And I still celebrate that. But I think that my notion, perhaps naive, was that we're going to come back, to when we get through some of these disruptions, that we're going to come back to a rational world that has learned from some of its mistakes, that's adopted new models that are clearly better, that is committed to a continuous evolutionary path, etc. And that seems far from the case to me. I increasingly feel as if instead of preparing children and my students for that rather positive, rationalistic vision of the future, it's more like saying, well, we're back to the Wild West. We're back to the Wild West where laws, whatever you make it to be, and what can be enforced is whatever you have the power to do, but it's not a stable situation anymore. It's gridlock that's so profound in terms of beliefs that it's frightening. So I'm concerned. Now let me give you part two. If you didn't think part one was gloomy, I'll give you the other piece of this. So I ask myself why? Why would a trend that has been true throughout history now be disrupted? And unfortunately, I think the answer is social media. I'm a big fan of social media. I've written about how social media is a kind of bottom-up knowledge that can counter a lot of the problems of top-down knowledge, and that the synthesis between the two can be very positive, and I believe that to be the case. But it's also true, and I've written about that from the beginning as well, that social media allows each of us to construct our own reality, and that if those realities diverge, then you have a very bad situation. And I think, unfortunately, that's even more true in terms of what's happening now. And so I'm wondering what unanticipated collateral damage we have done with social media, and how we can try to undo some of that. Now, I'd love to have you say, oh, Chris, what a bunch of bullshit, I mean, you must have had a bad week or something. These problems are not as dire as you make them out to be. It isn't social media. But I am struck with how things keep getting worse in the fundamental ways that I'm describing, and what that means for lifelong learning, what we're learning people to be able to cope with.
Well, Chris,
Can I,
go
Zhao?
ahead, Punya.
Yeah, so I'm going to drop a link here. It's funny, Chris, that you brought this up, because it's been on my mind for a while. And this was an article I just read, in fact, before this show started. And this is a philosopher of technology who talks about, like, what are we always, when a new technology comes along, we have this slippery slope arguments, right? Oh, people will start texting, and then because they text, they'll lose the power of communicating language, blah, blah, whatever. Like, you go back to Aristotle, like, writing will make people forget stuff and they will depend on the book. Actually, that did happen, right? We remember less and we look things up, right? But so this person talks about which technologies and the slippery slope argument, sometimes it seems to work, other times it doesn't. So people who talked about, for instance, the printing press in certain ways or pinball machines didn't work out that way. But there were those who talked about the automobiles, and like, if we build our whole cities around these modes of conveyance, that is going to dramatically change, so, and that did happen. And so he talks about two things. So one is, what are the sort of strong affordances of a given technology, by which he means sort of the cost of transaction. See, Curt, have a great session, and I will introduce the show at the end.
Thank you, Punya.
And so so if things become, so for instance, in what happens with, if earlier you wanted to you got angry at something and you wanted to voice your opinion, the cost of voicing your opinion was a lot. There was a cost of transaction. You had to sit down and write it, and then, rewrite it to make it readable, like the handwriting, then walk to the post office, mail it. And what has happened, the cost of transaction has dropped dramatically. So that's one, and the second is that, are there clear incentives to abuse it? And if you bring those two together, that's when, and so this guy talks about facial recognition, which I think is going to become very, very dangerous as a technology, and and so on. So anyway, so I love the point that you make, because I think that it does, but also like adding a layer to it as to what is it about this medium. And I think the cost of transaction has dramatically decreased, and the incentives for abuse are very strong, just given human psychological methods and so on. So yeah, it's a nice little piece there.
I got to jump into this, because Punya, you and I used to talk a lot about technology stuff when we were together at Michigan State. Chris, social media, if you look at, the big companies, look at what's happening at Facebook, what's happening with Twitter, all these algorithms, all of those things. I think, it's different from, print, because there are interests associated with this thing. Social media is controlled by people, and you have to, basically, you are under control by our few corporate people who have special interest. I think that, so, on the one hand, you can say, yeah, we can learn to deal with that, but you cannot really learn to deal with that, because your information is controlled. It's not truly free information. And of course, we can say that traditional libraries are pre-selected too. Libraries, have a sense of control on the readership as well, all those kind. So that's really interesting for all educators to say, we used to have the term called digital competency. Digital companies, how do you live in the digital life? How do you deal with that? We used to have all kinds of, digital literacy, all those things. I don't hear those words as much in schools now, So as if all children are used to that. I don't think we do. Because right now, the more you read in education, the more I get worried, because we are technically really, as a country, as many education systems, trying to teach literacy and numeracy and forget all other tough issues. We pretend other issues don't exist, other issues don't matter, because we have to get the test scores up in reading, get test scores up in math. Really, that is a very, very big question. But related to, like Tony Wagner and Ted Dintersmith, I think they have great ideas. But at the same time, we cannot evade a lot of the tough issues that you raised about, what should students learn? Should they be required? Like I said, many states require students to read or to pass the reading test by 3rd grade. Other than that, you cannot be promoted. You cannot go do something else. But is that a really smart way of doing things? Another way to think about it is, what is curriculum? Why do we require people? We can encourage teachers to be innovative, like Brent, Punya, at ASU. You can try, but do you still have a curriculum? But does the Arizona State curriculum make sense to all students? What should we change? And how can we do that? I think a lot of these big questions are lingering upon all of us. And at the same time, we're talking about a future for our children. Maybe this is a reason all of us are getting old, So we began to complain about the new. That's possible. If we bring someone new, Punya, like your children, our children, Chris, your kids, I don't know how they respond to this kind of issues. Chris?
Well, I agree that there's probably many factors that underlie this gridlock that we find ourselves increasingly mired in, this kind of quicksand where everything is up for grabs and interpretation, whether it's factual, whether it's illegal, whether it's what's happening in nature right outside of your window. Everything is up for grabs and interpretation. That's a really bizarre world. It's kind of a cabinet of Dr. Caligari world, really, where who are the people who are mad and who are the people who are sane. So what I'm less concerned with is trying to figure out the causation, because there's nothing we can do about that anyway. Whatever proportion of it is social media, that cat is out of the bag. It's not going to go back in. We just need to find a way to make things work with whatever the technologies are going to be. But what becomes important to give students so that they can be lifelong learners, so that they can cope in the kind of environment that they're facing, and the curriculum standards, whether you like them or not, are based around the idea that there is a society that's relatively unified in its views and its perspectives. And so it has standards that everybody agrees on that people should attempt to meet, that there's something to socialize them into. And that seems to me to be very much at risk now, at precisely the time that we have climate change and the pandemic. I mean, I'm not trying to cry wolf when there aren't some major crises around, just to see what happens. I think the pandemic and climate change are as scary as anything I've seen in my lifetime, even though they're not the result of enemies that are human, starting some kind of a war. But what to do, how to rethink education under those circumstances. I'm finding myself increasingly questioning my own assumptions and trying to go back to a more basic level and ask if the world is really going to be that turbulent, that disruptive, then what do we need to prepare students for?
Well, people studying history may always say every time you're facing crisis. So if you read educational writings, they will say, well, this is the best time to make the change. This is critical to make the change. You probably don't read a lot of it. So this is, we don't have to change. This is great, So everybody was saying we had crisis. We're always having crisis. But the size and the scope may be different, but we always like to maximize, the size and scope of the moment. So what for me, because we always want to be the most important people, we're born in the most important time, So what actually recently got me really thinking a lot is the idea about what to do when people are truly globalized, when the economy is globalized. Look at our global supply chains. It is a mess, right? We are truly, climate is the same, right? And actually look at, I think India may have the same problem. When China is suffering from electricity, power issues, because, they did not want to import coal from Australia, and they want to cut down carbon emissions. It's kind of interesting to say this. And so all of these things are so global, but education remains very local. I'm not advocating for global standard. I'm more thinking about, you have a class, a community. If you look at educational practices, we've heard again, Punya, the students from Nepal access MOOCs, where we're talking about, you and all of us are doing webinars for teachers around the globe. They join. But if you go back to their students are still largely localized in their own class, behind their walls, in the local community. So that is actually what bothers me to say, how can we recreate an education environment, at least allowing students to be more familiar with the issues of the pandemic, to be more familiar with the issues of climate change, just to be more exposed, to know people in other countries are also people, who are striving for a happy and prosperous life. So that is the piece I've been quite interested in to say, okay, who is doing more really in that regard to get a sense of globalization, a sense of we live in the same village, a sense of a common life across different nations. I was just wondering, Punya, if you have anything to add or to jump on any other issues? You're on mute, Punya.
Sorry. No, just want to follow on just combine, I think, what the two of you are saying, because, I've also sort of talked about this, what I call chronocentrism, like the time that I live in is the most interesting one. But I have this weird feeling that this time it may be that, particularly, it's not the pandemic as much. I think the pandemic, it will work its way out. Right. But what it has done has revealed these schisms, these chasms, these mindsets, what have you. And to me, the climate change is the one where we are just barreling into it without any, forget global, sort of local, sort of thought about it. And any solution to this is going to happen across scales. It cannot be one country doing it. It cannot, it just has to be. And that's making me wonder whether this is part of a conversation which happens at, of what do we need our students to know? And I think Zhao is pointing to one very important one, is to understand that we are part of this global, civilization. It's no longer a village or a town or a state, and so on. So, this is really pushing us to think globally about how we take decisions about things. So, and I don't have a solution to that clearly. But I think there is an educational point there. I think the other thing is, it's telling me, it's just a couple of thoughts, right? It's telling me is that we really need to, we have spent, let's just look at the curriculum. We spent so much of our time on things like algebra and so on, right? In the math curriculum. We don't do probabilistic thinking. We don't understand the basics of data and statistics, of prediction, of modeling. To me, it's the lack of that understanding that I think gets in the way of a lot of the way people respond to these things. So if I don't know somebody who is sick, that means this pandemic is a fiction. Or, oh, here is Colin Powell, he got the shot and he died, which means the shots are of no use at all. That's because we just have not, in our educational system, supported the development of these skills, or not until you go to, do your undergraduate or you take a special class or something that way. So I think that there are significant questions about what should be taught in schools and what we should be thinking about in that scale. And one is sort of the globalization piece, but I think there is another piece there about how to think straight, about with data, with numbers, with facts.
Well, thinking straight, Punya, globally is about globalization. I look at the stupid, China and India, for example. People are so easily manipulated. That's one issue, so they can be manipulated to go very high, like, oh, let's go kill India, China, India. Sure, the media, the social media, political leaders, they can easily manipulate people. That's what, individuals has not been taught to think straight. I think that's another issue. So that's another issue which I have a huge problem with, with educational systems which are not educating. They're really brainwashing. So that's another issue. So, we have to be very careful with good education versus good brainwashing. So that is, I think many countries deliberately intentionally brainwash people. I mean, in the US, you got some states, some districts, all this big argument is that, so how do you, I think one of the reasons people say, okay, let's focus on literacy and numeracy because those are two things schools can teach. You don't need to get into characters, civics, all those kind of things. I think that's a tough issue. Thinking straight, Punya, as you said, is what we need to teach, and think straight rationally or based on data, knows about, what's happening. That's all we need, right? It's to understand how humanities live together. I mean, like, right now, everybody hates everybody, and that seems to drive people's energy. I never get it. Why do you drive people's energy up there? So that's really something I would like to see education shifting and changing, but it's so hard to get political systems to even consider something different. And this is why, by the way, Chris, I'm so opposed to OECD PISA stuff. If you look at PISA basically tests those, literacy, numeracy, and the science, and then they think that's great in all this stuff. Chris, I was just wondering if you want to jump in. I get really angry with this stuff.
Well, I think that we need to pay more attention to human nature in our education. And I'll give an example of something that I like that's happening with the diversity, inclusion, and equity movement. And that is the emphasis on innate bias and tacit bias. The fact of the matter is that the brain is a biased brain. The perceptions that people have are biased at the perception level before it ever gets to cognition. And so if you really want to deal with bias, you have to begin by saying, I'm going to see the world in a biased way, and I'm going to think in biased ways because of that. So it's not a matter of becoming unbiased. It's a matter of understanding your biases and acting to overcome them. I think that's exactly right. I think that human nature is intrinsically biased. But we need to go farther. We need to say human nature is intrinsically xenophobic. And again, that goes all the way back to the animal brain and a time in which people who looked like you were safer than people who didn't look like you. And we need in education to say, it's really important that you're xenophilic rather than xenophobic, but you've got a hill to climb in the same way that it's really important that you value diversity and equity, but you've got a hill to climb. I think another part of human nature that we're seeing a lot of now, and you've referred to it, is that human beings love to blame somebody else for their problems rather than themselves. And so you can always get political traction to saying to people, it isn't you. You're fine just the way you are. It's these other evil people who are coming from the outside, who are different than you, who want what you have, who are going to undercut you. And of course, people buy in. They buy in because that's where human nature starts. So I guess what I'm saying is, instead of this idea that students are walking in and they're blank slates and we just need to draw on cognitive science and emotional intelligence and, dispositions and push that blank slate in a positive direction, people are coming in with tremendous strengths that takes them well above being blank slates, and they're coming in biologically with tremendous weaknesses that make them blank slates in the wrong direction. And we need to take that into account in how we educate. But of course, if we educate people to be xenophilic, if we educate them not to blame other people for things without first looking at themselves, if we teach people to assume bias and to actively watch themselves for it and act to overcome it, most of the reasons that people are in power today are going to disappear. So you're going to have a whole group of people just like in Orwell's 1984 or Huxley's Brave New World, to name the dystopian literature that I grew up with, who are very happy with the status quo and who know that the kind of education that we're talking about is going to leave them out in the cold.
Chris, thanks for that. You know, that this idea about challenging ourselves, questioning our biases, and you know, it's kind of sort of ongoing now with the DEI, with the diversity, you know, in the US after George Floyd. But I don't think it's going as far as where you want to go. It is questioning our biological or our bio-determined, like xenophobia, for example. You know, we used to call xenophobia like as this evolutionary hangover. That is, it was useful, you know, at one time, but it's not useful anymore. You know, right now with this idea called social emotional learning, I was looking at someone was sending me a document about, which is very troubling to me. You know, the first category is to say, are students proud of their culture? So you think, imagine a third grade, you're trying to challenge their thinking, their culture, who they are. No, students have to feel good, feel proud. That is kind of dangerous to me, right? You know, that is not healthy. You know, no one has the perfect culture. No one has the perfect thing better than others, you know. So actually, many years ago, I was asked to comment on something. Someone wrote a book of how to learn Chinese. And the chapter said, Chinese is the most beautiful language. I said, which language is not the most beautiful language? I mean, really, we used to say, no, what the hell, you know? So people always say, you know, people say that, you know, my language, my culture, my food, my place, it always the best. But that's not necessarily true. You got to question all of those. I happen to know Hindi. I think Hindi is the best language. If I said that in China, I might have been shot, you know. But it's really those kind of things in education. You know, education always can teach how to be proud of yourself, be proud of your community, be proud of your country, right? You know, but not questioning that, you know. So that's really actually quite interesting. Well, Punya, you were talking about some guy bringing in.
So Zhao's plan for global survival is create the curriculum of shame. I'm just messing with you, man. No, I agree. I think it's these parochial sort of mindsets that really get in the way. And one can be, I mean, I'm incredible. I mean, I don't know if I'm proud of the fact that I'm Indian, but you know, that is a part of who I am. And recognizing that this gives me a certain unique perspective on the world, on what I eat, the music I listen to, my accent, you know, and adds to the richness of the experience of people hopefully around me. I mean, you know, it's not a, you know, it's this pride, sort of unquestioning pride, I think is the problem, you know, in some way. I mean, you know, and I don't think necessarily people who are working in the DEI space are necessarily saying that. I think they're coming, I think rightfully so, coming from a space where, because those certain groups, certain things have been devalued, have been marginalized, that children growing up in those cultures have been made to feel that they're less than. And I think that there is a corrective that needs to be made there, in terms of recognizing that, no, just because you're a different color of skin or accent or what have you, that in no way makes you a lesser person. So I think that's where that is coming from. But I mean, it is the unthinking sort of, you know, rah-rah patriotism that I think gets in the way sometimes, right?
Well, you know, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I just want to say that I've been a big advocate of, you know, sort of 21st, it's a very dated term now to say 21st century skills, next generation global skills, whatever you want to call them, global competencies, and things that go beyond the industrial era. And I think those are important. I'm not saying that I regret having championed them. But I think that those assume a degree of rationality and coherence in the 21st century that it's increasingly apparent is not going to be there. And so there's also I almost feel like publishing a survivalist set of skills for the 21st century that are parallel to these 2030 skills that say, but you're going to be living in an incredibly chaotic time with a lot of people who don't like what you're trying to do. And so you've got to have knowledge, skills, and dispositions that help you survive under those conditions. And that's something that I did not really think about at all until fairly recently.
Yeah, I think I agree. I agree. I think that's a good insight. And again, I've also written about the 21st century skills and so on, but this was not an element that sort of really came up in as strongly as it should have, I think. Clearly.
Well, I mean, actually, the 21st century skills, I don't think they're going to work anyway. And they are, it's just not very powerful enough to capture the human aspect of what we're trying to talk about, the human education. I mean, Chris, Punya, you and I, and all of us have been graduate education for a long time. We have had students from different countries. They truly do bring different perspectives and do bring different kind of experiences. But ultimately, I'm going back to Punya, your work, your college's work. When you're trying to change practices in schools, that might help students reflect on their biases, reflect on, just possible biases. Teachers, where do we get them? I'm thinking about your next generation kind of workforce. How do we get teachers to even reflect on their own work and to reflect on the work beyond the immediate requirement?
Right.
That is one of the things I've been challenging educators to think about, because everybody's thinking about the system, the testing, the requirement, and said, well, beyond that, what can happen? Because when we're in education, I think everybody is in education, hopefully, is for a bigger goal than just fulfilling the requirement. You're educating. This is a special role. You're helping other people to grow. You're helping other people to become better persons. If we took that moral kind of obligation, what can we do? So I'm always begging a lot of teachers, can you see through beyond the curriculum, beyond the pacing guide, beyond this week and next week? Can you see this child in your eyes? Can they grow? And can they grow to be more reflective of themselves? So that's really kind of the challenge we face today, is this multi-generational challenge. That is why also education is so hard to change, because so many people have a role, have some interest in this process.
Well, one of the things that I take heart in is that as divergent as the views of education's objectives are globally and within a community, pretty much everybody agrees that they want their children to have a successful life, that education is a means to an end, and the end is, as an adult, to be empowered in different ways, financially, civically, in terms of dealing with your family and so on. And people talk a lot about the big lie. Well, there's a lot of big lies in education. The big lie that if you graduate from Harvard, you're going to have a successful life. The big lie that if you have perfect test scores. The big lie that if you know everything in the school curriculum. Those don't guarantee success in life. And that's easy to demonstrate just by doing studies of people who meet those criteria. The correlation between success in education and success in life is relatively weak. So somehow, I think, going back to the families and saying, let's really talk about what's needed for success in life for your children, And don't buy into this stuff about the test scores and the elite universities and the this and the that. Let's just look at the successful adults that you know and project where the future is going, and the people that are getting ahead of that train. Because that's going to have to be a kind of a way that we rebuild educational outcomes from the bottom up. We can try to change educational processes from the middle out or the top down, but educational outcomes are going to have to be changed from the bottom up, I believe.
So I just want to share this article from the Washington Post today. I'm sharing it on YouTube.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting. Talks about the development of the mastery transcript, talking about the principal of Hawkins School in Cleveland, trying to recreate a new transcript for students. It's a big a consortium now. That's interesting. Another thing I actually want to share is that today I just learned China just passed a new law, Chris, the family education law. So I have not read the law. Stipulates what parents can do, what parents cannot do. So that is actually a very interesting effort of a government telling parents what it can do. So do you think in the US we can require parents to have a law for parents?
Didn't China also limit how much video time you should have or screen time?
No more than 3 hours, for young children. Yeah, we're serious people,
That's
Chinese
good.
government is very serious about your kids' education, So think about passing a law to require parents to do certain things. Just imagine the US, we should suggest Biden to do that. That would be a great thing for Biden to accomplish.
I think he has enough problems without adding that to his list.
Yeah, it's but overall, I really feel like this past several really episodes, we did talk about large education, big ones. We did talk about new practices. We did talk about blended learning. But I think, today, what I'm happy about, Chris and Punya, and now Curt is gone, is we're actually talking about things that have been talked about in different domains, but not so passionately, unlike today. I really enjoyed this conversation. It get me going. And this may be, again, this may be cabin fever, who knows? Maybe we're just locked in our house for too long. We began to have crazy ideas, this could be another reason of the pandemic. But I really questioning where humanity is going and what role education plays does matter.
I think it'd be great to get some guests who are sort of philosophers of education, who or people who are thinking about these bigger questions.
Like,
well, I think this has been our Halloween show, personally. Ghoulies and ghosties and things that go bump in the night.
There you go.
This is our Halloween show for our viewers.
Halloween show. That is true.
Well, we got to dress up, for Halloween. You got to dress up for something. If you did not have the vaccination, you cannot go on Halloween.
Oh, I remember last Halloween we had the students from Nepal, and I had my wig on.
That was a year ago now, Punya?
That was a year ago.
Oh my God. I feel like we're running the show, back to back. So, but anyway, so unless you guys have any final moments to share, I think Punya is going to talk about next episode.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump in and do that. And again, this episode was organized by Curt. So take what I say with a grain of salt. But the important piece here is that it's at a different time. So we will be, doing 7:30 p.m. Eastern, because that would be 7:30 a.m. in China, where our guests are coming from. And the title of the episode is Education Enabled by Technology, Fostering Learning in Undersourced Village Schools in China. And it talks about the work done by this organization called Volun Online. It's a nonprofit based in Shanghai. And for the guest, we have Dr. Xiaoran Wang, and she's a researcher for this project, and Jasmine Zhu, who is a teacher, educator, and content developer for the nonprofit. So we'll get sort of two different perspectives on that, and look forward to that episode.
All right.
Thank you guys. Zhao, just want to second what you said at the end. This was, I'd said in the beginning that I wasn't feeling very well and I would be kind of quiet. Clearly that didn't work out that way, which means I'm already feeling better. So despite the doom and gloom, I think this was a great conversation. So thank you guys for that.
Well, thank you. This was actually quite deep. I'm glad we did this. So thanks, Chris. Thanks, Punya.
Well, my gym teacher used to say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So